What if I told you that the future of Africa, its energy, its politics, and even its stability, might all hinge on one country that's balancing on the edge of transformation and collapse at the same time? That country is Ethiopia, a land often described as the cradle of humanity. A nation that never bowed to colonization, where ancient empires clashed and religions intertwined. And yet today, it's also a place of unrest, youth-driven change, and a race to build the largest hydroelectric dam on the entire continent. But here's the real question. Is Ethiopia on the verge of becoming Africa's rising powerhouse? Or could it be headed for a collapse that shocks the world? Stick with me as we break down the Ethiopia that's rarely shown in headlines. And as you watch, let me know in the comments, do you believe Ethiopia will rise or fall? Section 1. The demographic tidal wave. Ethiopia is massive, both in size and people. With over 134 million people today, it's the second most populous nation in Africa after Nigeria. But here's what makes it different. The median age is just 19. That means nearly half the country is younger than 20. Imagine an entire nation powered by teenagers and 20-somethings restless, ambitious, and hungry for change. But this youth explosion is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could mean endless potential. Innovation, growth, a new labor force that could lift the economy. On the other, it could become a ticking time bomb of unemployment, frustration, and unrest. Because here's the reality. Most of Ethiopia is still rural. Around 80% of people live in villages or scattered farms, many surviving off agriculture alone. And while Addis Ababa, the capital, is booming with skyscrapers and highways, most young people in rural Ethiopia aren't connected to that progress. And the internet? Still limited. Only about 1 in 5 Ethiopians is online, which means millions of young voices remain unheard in the global conversation. But when they do get online, something interesting happens. They connect, they organize, and they challenge authority. This demographic tidal wave isn't just about numbers. It's about a generation that refuses to wait. The question is, can Ethiopia create jobs, opportunities, and stability fast enough? Or will this youth bulge explode into chaos? Quick check for you, the viewer. Are you under 25? Drop your age in the comments. I want to see how Ethiopia's youth compares to you. But demographics are only part of the story. Because while millions of young Ethiopians are dreaming about their future, the present reality is still haunted by something darker. Conflict that refuses to die. Section 2. Conflict under the surface. Ethiopia has always been a nation of diversity, over 80 ethnic groups, dozens of languages, and multiple religions. On paper, that sounds like a rich cultural tapestry, but in reality, those differences often turn into political fault lines. Even after the brutal Tigray War, 2020-2022 ended, Ethiopia never really found peace. The headlines may have faded, but beneath the surface, old wounds are reopening, and new rivalries are forming. In Tigray, once the center of Ethiopia's ruling elite, the political party known as the TPLF is tearing itself apart. Its two main leaders, Debretsion Gebremichael and Getachew Reda, are locked in a power struggle that has left the region fragile and divided. Imagine rebuilding after years of destruction, only to watch your leaders fight each other. But it's not just Tigray. In Oromia, the largest region in Ethiopia, a rebel group known as the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, is fighting government forces in a shadow war. And in the Amhara region, armed militias clash with federal troops in battles that rarely make the news. The cost? Millions displaced, entire villages burned, and families forced to flee overnight. Ethiopia now has one of the largest internally displaced populations in the world. And here's the twist. While the government insists it has the situation under control, every new conflict adds fuel to Ethiopia's growing instability. It's like a pressure cooker with the lid shaking, waiting for the next explosion. Question for you watching right now. Do you think Ethiopia's diversity is its greatest strength or its biggest weakness? Drop your thoughts in the comments. But war and politics aren't the only battles Ethiopia is fighting. Even if the guns went silent tomorrow, the country faces another ticking time bomb, an economy caught between promise and collapse. Section 3. Economic strains and the debt trap. For years, Ethiopia was painted as the African miracle. Double-digit growth rates, shiny new roads, modern railways, and a skyline rising over Addis Ababa. But here's the truth no one likes to admit. The miracle was built on shaky ground. Ethiopia is now one of Africa's most indebted economies. In late 2023, the country defaulted on its $1 billion Eurobond, and even today it's scrambling to restructure that debt under the G20's common framework. Investors are watching closely, but with inflation soaring and foreign reserves draining, confidence is at an all-time low. And if you think that's just numbers, think again. Inflation in Ethiopia doesn't just mean pricier coffee. It means families in rural towns can't afford basic bread or cooking oil. It means salaries lose value overnight, while young graduates with degrees line up for jobs that don't exist. Here's the paradox. Ethiopia has huge potential. It's Africa's top coffee producer. It has gold, livestock, fertile land, and one of the fastest growing populations in the world. Yet corruption, weak property rights, and a government that still clings tightly to state-owned enterprises are strangling growth. Even recent reforms, like issuing the first investment banking licenses, feel like too little, too late. Foreign companies are cautious. Investors whisper one word again and again: risk. And that risk has consequences. Because while the government is trying to attract billions in infrastructure projects, ordinary Ethiopians are still surviving on less than $3 a day. The gap between Ethiopia's promises and Ethiopia's reality keeps getting wider. Quick question: have you ever felt like your country's leaders promise more than they deliver? Type yes if you can relate, or no if you think they've lived up to expectations. But Ethiopia isn't just sitting still. To its leaders, the way out of poverty and instability is through big, bold projects. From the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa to even signing a deal for a future nuclear power plant, Ethiopia is betting everything on ambition. The question is, will these projects lift the nation or push it into even deeper conflict? Section 4. Big projects, bigger tensions. If Ethiopia's economy feels like it's sinking, the government's answer has been simple: build, and build big. The crown jewel of this vision is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric project in Africa, standing tall on the Blue Nile. It promises electricity for millions, exports for neighboring countries, and the symbol of a modern Ethiopia rising from poverty. On paper, it's genius. Imagine lighting up entire villages that have lived in the dark for centuries. Imagine factories humming, schools powered, and a new middle class finally emerging. But here's the catch. This dam doesn't just belong to Ethiopia. It sits on the Nile, a river that Egypt and Sudan depend on for survival. Egypt especially sees the Nile as its lifeblood. And when Ethiopia started filling the dam, Egypt called it an existential threat. For years, negotiations have dragged on. Ethiopia insists it has the right to use its waters. Egypt warns of all options on the table. Sudan sits uneasily in between. One project meant to bring pride has turned into a regional powder keg, and Ethiopia isn't stopping there. In 2025, it signed an agreement with Russia to plan a nuclear power plant. Ambitious? Absolutely. But at a time when Ethiopia is still restructuring its debt and battling inflation, critics are asking, how do you fund nuclear dreams when bread prices are rising at home? For ordinary Ethiopians, these mega projects feel like both hope and betrayal. On one hand, they bring jobs and energy. On the other, farmers near the dam complain of displacement. Communities fear drought downstream, and activists warn that Ethiopia is mortgaging its future for prestige. If your government promised you free electricity from a dam, but your neighbors accused it of stealing their water, whose side would you be on? Drop home first if you'd back your country, or peace first if you'd choose negotiation. But while leaders debate dams, reactors, and billion-dollar projects, millions of Ethiopians are trapped in a reality far removed from grand visions. Because behind the numbers, behind the headlines, there's a human cost, and it's one of Ethiopia's darkest secrets. Section 5. The human cost and hidden crises. When people talk about Ethiopia, they often focus on the big headlines: dams, wars, and economic numbers. But if you zoom in closer, you'll see a quieter tragedy: millions of ordinary lives caught in the crossfire. Take the conflicts in Tigray and Oromia. Beyond the battles and politics, they left entire communities shattered, villages reduced to ashes, families fleeing in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Ethiopia today has one of the largest populations of internally displaced people in the world. And what happens when you're displaced? You lose more than a home. You lose your school, your livelihood, your sense of security. Reports say millions of children are out of school because classrooms were destroyed or turned into military bases. Some haven't seen a textbook in years. Then there's the economy's silent toll. Rising food prices mean parents go hungry so their kids can eat. And in rural areas, families survive on one meal a day, sometimes less. For many Ethiopians, development is still a distant promise. But perhaps the darkest chapter is what happened in Tigray. International reports have accused Ethiopian and allied forces of systematic sexual violence, mass rape, forced pregnancies, even torture. Survivors describe it as a weapon of war, leaving scars that may never heal. These are stories too painful for many to even tell aloud. And yet the world often looks away. Ethiopia becomes another statistic, another crisis overshadowed by the next headline. But for the people living through it, there's no pause button, no escape. If you're watching this, take a second to drop a heart in the comments for the children who lost their schools. Let's make sure their stories aren't forgotten. But here's the paradox. Amid the displacement, the hunger, and the silence, something new is rising. A force that Ethiopia's old leaders can't fully control. Because while guns roar in the countryside, Ethiopia's youth are logging on, connecting, and dreaming of a different future. Section 6. Digital, Youth, and Future Forces. Here's something most people don't realize. While Ethiopia struggles with war, famine, and politics, its young generation is quietly building a different Ethiopia online. Remember, only about 1 in 5 Ethiopians is connected to the internet right now, but those who are connected are changing everything. Young creators on TikTok, activists on Twitter, entrepreneurs on LinkedIn, they're reshaping how Ethiopia is seen, both inside and outside the country. In Addis Ababa, you'll find tech hubs buzzing with coders, dreamers, and startups trying to solve problems the government never could. They're building apps for mobile banking, logistics, and even platforms to connect farmers with buyers directly, cutting out layers of corruption. Social media has also become a battlefield. Activists use it to expose abuses, organize protests, and call out corruption. But at the same time, misinformation spreads just as fast, deepening ethnic divides and fueling distrust. The same tools that could unite Ethiopia can also tear it apart. Still, Ethiopia's youth bulge is a force that can't be ignored. They don't carry the same weight of old rivalries, and many don't want to fight their parents' wars. What they want is jobs, education, and dignity. What they need is a system that listens. Quick question. If you believe young people can change a country's future, type change in the comments. If you think the old guard always wins, type cycle. So where does all this leave Ethiopia? A nation of over 134 million people, standing at a crossroads between promise and peril. On one side, a growing youth population, massive projects like the Renaissance Dam, and an untapped potential to become a true African powerhouse. On the other side, deepening conflicts, economic strain, and human suffering that refuses to stay buried. The truth is, Ethiopia embodies both hope and heartbreak. It's a country that could light up an entire continent or plunge itself into darkness if its challenges spin out of control. And maybe that's what makes Ethiopia so fascinating. It isn't just a story of the past or the present, it's a story of what the future of Africa could look like. So now I'll leave you with one question. Do you think Ethiopia will rise into a new golden age? Or is it headed for another cycle of collapse? Drop your thoughts below. And if you've made it this far, leave the word horn in the comments, so I know you're part of the community that digs deeper, past the headlines. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe for more country deep dives, and share this with someone who needs to understand Africa beyond the stereotypes. Because Ethiopia's story isn't finished yet, and neither is ours.